This video is brought to you by Brilliant.
Alleys are like the unsung heroes of urban planning and design. And to be quite honest, I think it's part of what makes Chicago so great and so easy to live in. That might sound flip or too easily skipping over some of the more important aspects of a city like this one, like its tall buildings, its public transit, or its waterfronts. But by the end of this video, I hope that you'll start appreciating alleys almost as much as I do, or at least see them for the complex and vital urban spaces that they are.
Chicago has the largest network of alleys of any city in the United States. There are almost 1,900 miles of alleyways within the city limits. Looking at a map of the city with all of them highlighted in blue looks like capillaries spreading through the human body. Every city is built up from a typical block, which is unique to that city. The size and shape of this fundamental building block, it affects almost every aspect of how the city works and feels. A standard block in, say, Manhattan is about 264 feet by 900 feet, or 80 meters by 274 meters from the center of the street to the center of the street. Parcels of 100 feet butt up to each other back to back in a long, repetitive series. The block shape in New York is relatively long and narrow, and the city that's produced by repeating these units ends up with a distinct grain that interrupts movement in one direction at a much greater rate than in the other direction. The narrowness in the east-west axis also means that a building could relatively easily stretch from the entire distance of the block, and if it doesn't, there isn't any room left over between building lots in this direction. Buildings are surrounded on all sides, and they struggle to get access for deliveries or for light and air. In Chicago, on the other hand, a typical block is 330 feet by 660 feet, or 100 meters by 200 meters. It's more squarish than it is long and narrow, and this makes the differences in traveling in different directions in Chicago much less dramatic. So going north-south doesn't end up feeling like it takes forever to get to the next block or the stopping point. And in the other direction, it doesn't feel like you have to stop every couple of steps. The reason the blocks can be more squarish is because that 330-foot width is broken up by an 18-foot wide alley public way. This slice divides the properties in the short direction of the block, and it forms a mid-block barrier and a passage that allows accessibility to the back sides of every lot. Officially, this space is used to separate waste removal and deliveries from the primary pedestrian and other traffic on main streets. It provides a fire break between structures, so flames don't spread so easily. The space also allows for supplementary circulation, airflow, and light on the backside of buildings. In residential areas, it's where the garages go, eliminating the need for driveways that break up the sidewalk.
Informally, though, the space is used for all sorts of things, like garage parties, or places to launch fireworks, or places to hook up, or a place to hide all of your junk. Public sentiment around alleys have changed over the years, and their evolution is fascinating as they are repurposed in response to the way that the overall city evolves. They also operate simultaneously at vastly different scales, from solving large-scale logistical problems of urban flows to more human-scaled opportunities for occupation. And alleys have survived the transition from horses to cars. And they've gone from being called gangways, an outmoded but straightforward name for the undesirable inhabitants that would do their business here, all the way to becoming celebratory party spaces with city-sanctioned events.
The very first layout plan of Chicago from 1830, this drawing called a plat, shows a series of blocks broken up in the confluence of the three branches of the Chicago River. Streets are named after presidents or explorers and run in cardinal directions, and the block numbers, which start at Kinsey and Dearborn, sit inside the 18-foot gap between the property lines. These alleys run east and west on the east side of the river and north and south on the west side. This plan comes about 20 years after the first layouts of Manhattan and represents an important invention and improvement that was described to enable the city to evolve of a mass-produced services and mass-produced access, one of the civic accomplishments of the century. By 1900, over 98% of Chicago's residential blocks had alleys, and remained so for the next century. But by World War I, alleys were starting to be considered a waste of space and an invitation for crime. This attitude lasted in most of the United States for decades, and development during this time and onward in Chicago often didn't include alleys for these reasons. Alleys were the domain of the working class folks, like garbage men, peddlers, and tradespeople. There were spaces for horses, and lined with coach houses which provide stables and apartments for their keepers. It's also where horse manure was stored before being carted away.
Alleys are basically where you put everything undesirable so that everything desirable can live on the street. They were dirty places and served as septic systems of the city, with latrines and water wells, kitchens, and even coal deliveries.
In working class areas, though, alleys were a space to start a business or for public gathering. In these areas, it wouldn't have been uncommon to find a small manufacturing space or repair shops lining an alley, or apartments or children's play areas. Once the average citizen started to own cars, the wealthier folks didn't necessarily want to drive along the alley due to their past associations. Instead, automobile owners preferred just parking on the street or using front-loaded driveways, and this trend followed in most urban areas planned post-World War II. Originally, alleys were unpaved and lacked connections to storm sewers. Many would have been paved with Belgian wood blocks. This material and application is called Nicholson pavement, and it was a cheap way to create a durable outdoor surface. While it was cheap, it did require a lot of maintenance, and never really produced a very good flat surface. Today, much of the woodblock surfaces in Chicago are paved over, but at Astor Street, you can still see some of that original system.
There is something intimate and comforting in regards to the scale of an alley. Even though they exist for urban scale design considerations, their execution is on a much smaller and more intimate level.
William Volker says, "To move through alleys today is almost to move through another place and time, through a sort of quiet valley between close forms. Their scale and variety of elements can be quite comfortable." While some find this kind of privacy within a public space of the city comforting, it also makes a space susceptible to being co-opted for illegal activity and crime. As I mentioned earlier, alleys might also be called gangways, a term that developed during the crime-ridden days of Chicago when Al Capone ruled the streets and the alleys that supported them. Alleyways often work as places where regulations are less likely to be enforced. This can either be a negative or a positive thing, depending on how you look at it. All these qualities add up to making alleys an important setting for narratives that take place in a city, in books, plays, TV, and film.
And Grady Clay says about alleys that they tell a story. Even if there is an edge of danger, there's something romantic about them.
You might see the seedy side of alleys portrayed in, say, Batman, where the caped crusader ventures into the places that normal citizens shouldn't go, the domain of villains and criminals. But of course, alleys weren't invented here in Chicago or in Batman. They've existed in other parts of the world for hundreds of years before they were ever deployed in that 1830 planning drawing of Chicago. And in those cultures, alleys have found new, more positive narratives, given that these cultures had a little bit more time to figure those out. In Wong Kar-wai's modern classic In the Mood for Love, produced in Hong Kong, the alley is like a character filled with all kinds of textures, sights, and sounds as the protagonists brush up against one another along their journey toward an affair. The alley is an intimate place of meeting, and while it is largely out of sight, in this film it's a place for a different kind of illicit activity. In Asia and Europe, the alley has been around much longer, and in some ways have developed a more advanced attitude toward them, or at least a very productive way of utilizing them. In China, Hutongs are a type of narrow street commonly associated with northern Chinese cities like Beijing. They're subject to the protection and even reconstruction after years of overlooking their importance and a certain amount of demolition. And in Japan, the Shinjuku Golden Gai is a lively place with dozens of bars and clubs and eateries squeezed within the tiny urban space.
In the United States, we're starting to recognize the opportunities of alleys to produce a more robust and vibrant urban experience. Even though they were originally built for horses and were adapted for cars, they've always seemed to find a way to be useful. And in some municipalities, including here in Chicago, we're making a concerted effort to be able to explore what they can become today.
In Chattanooga, Tennessee, for instance, you have programs like the Passageways Initiative by River City Company, who worked with the design practice Sports to create a permanent installation at 10 East 7th Street in downtown Chattanooga. Sports' Molly Hunker and Greg Corso designed a wrapping green corkscrew made of steel tubes. The project physically connects visitors with a single gesture that produces a number of different kinds of conditions along its length. It connects wall and ground and sky into one spatial composition, while at the same time it breaks down the overall space into a series of more intimate spaces, or what they call urban rooms. Along the whole length of the object, you get informal lounge and seating areas, mini stages, or areas for moving screenings, or even dance floors. Here in Chicago, the Chicago Loop Alliance has also sponsored a series of events set within alleys found in the Loop. That initiative is called Activate and includes a temporary physical intervention designed by Port Architecture and Urbanism. The design is sort of like a demountable triumphal arch. It can be built, taken down, and rebuilt at the mouth of almost any alley in the city. This is possible because of the common 18-foot width, which was set at the outset of Chicago's planning. The vinyl-wrapped scaffold structure becomes site-specific with each installation when a photograph of the unique alley location is taken before the party. This image is then printed and wrapped around the arch, and it creates an uncanny visual trick. The archway then provides a permeable barrier that offers spatial definition for the party and a barrier to entry that can be monitored. While the construction camouflages the party behind it, the line down the street and the music spilling out hints at the intensity of different activities inside. Once you enter, you're treated to local art and music and performances as you begin to take part in the transformation of the urban environment.
Alleys aren't as glamorous as streets or parks or plazas in the suite of urban public spaces that you might encounter. But just because they aren't as glamorous doesn't mean that they're any less important. In fact, their combination of humble function and intimate spatial qualities, they form a unique mixture that can't be easily replicated in more formal or ceremonial spaces.
Brilliant has generously supported this video, and I wanted to tell you a little bit about how I got started using Brilliant in my spare time to be able to brush up on some skills and knowledge that I've regrettably let lapse over the years. Brilliant is a learning experience that teaches and challenges you with progressive and interactive programs, puzzles, and exchanges that make learning feel like entertainment. And look, I am generally not a puzzler at all. I don't have a single game on my phone. I'm not necessarily sure why, but I've just never really gotten into any. But instead, what I'll do is I'll start a lesson with Brilliant on my computer on maybe a lunch break, and then I'll pick up where I left off on my phone while I'm waiting somewhere out in the world. I've been working my way through their logic series that uses robot characters that I've been grown attached to. They keep racing and misreporting their findings. Along the way, I've definitely needed some help to be able to solve a puzzle or two, and Brilliant is super easy to navigate and accepting of my failures, and I found myself thinking more clearly and deeply throughout the day since. But Brilliant has lessons for everyone. You don't have to be like me in any way. There are life-applicable topics to match your curiosity, and Brilliant offers a community to help inspire and keep you excited about learning. So I've worked out a deal with them where the first 200 people to click on the link in the description, brilliant.org/Stewart Hicks, they'll get 20% off of their annual premium subscription. So why don't you get started playing and learning with Brilliant today?
If you enjoyed this video, please consider giving it a like and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Videos about various architectural topics come out on Thursdays, and while you wait for the next one, check out some of these others. See you over there.